Hello and welcome to this NET English Back to Basics video focusing today on Language Paper 2 Section B. Now, as with all the other videos, the idea in these is that we'll be talking through a really simple summary version of the key points about how to approach the question and doing it in as concise and condensed form as possible. Now, by the time you come to this question, you should already have read both sources and answered questions 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now section B is the writing section, and for this paper it's about your ability to write non-fiction texts, and in particular your persuasive writing. Now the topic for the section is usually loosely the same thing that the two sources have been about, so you can get some ideas from there if useful. That is a good reason to do section A before you do section B, so that you've already had a chance to think about the topic. Now for this section, you're only given one question, and that question is going to tell you, first of all, what you're writing. So the type of text, the genre of it. Second of all, it'll tell you why you're writing. And if we cut through it all, essentially that's to persuade someone or something. Thirdly, you're told who you're writing for, so your audience. And fourthly, you're told what you're writing about, your topic. Now you may come across people calling this the CAP, so the context, the audience, the purpose. You may find them calling it the GAP, the genre, the audience, the purpose, the grasp. There's any one of 100 different things. Now whichever one you've been taught, it boils down to the same basic stuff. What you're writing, why, what it's about, and who it's for. Now once again, you're marked on a very clear set of things. Firstly, the quality of your writing, so your ideas, your vocabulary, the techniques and the features that you use, and the impact that they have on your audience. Secondly, you're marked on the structure of your writing, so the order things are in, and that includes your paragraphing. Thirdly, you're marked on the accuracy and the variety of your writing, and that's more or less your spelling, your punctuation and your grammar, and the range of those things that you've used. With 40 possible marks, you want to be spending the full 45 minutes on this section, and that is the timing that AQA recommend on the paper. About 5 to 10 minutes of that you want to spend planning, and the rest of the time writing, possibly with a few minutes at the end built in to check over your work, make sure capital letters, full stops are right, and that kind of thing. Now for this question, you do need to be getting the genre right. And it can only be one of four things: an article, a letter, a speech, or an essay. Now each of those has one or two key things that make it that genre. So for an article, it needs a headline, right? You have a more formal style, that kind of thing. For a letter, you can start with an address, a date, that kind of idea, but you definitely need a dear and the person's name at the start of it, and a yours sincerely at the end. If it's a letter, do make sure that wherever humanly possible, you name the person you're writing to, so that you can therefore make it personal and individual. You can start with sir or madam, that is valid, but it's kind of impersonal. A specific named person is always better if you can. For a speech, you'll start by greeting your audience, welcoming them to a place, introducing the topic, that kind of idea. And for an essay, it's more or less just a piece of writing in which you discuss, review, analyse, consider the topic. Now your audience can be anyone really, but the basic idea is that you're writing for the examiner, because it's the examiner really you're trying to impress with the way you write. So just think of it as being written for a reasonably intelligent adult audience. If it's more specific, so parents at your local school, your local MP, that kind of idea, you can talk about things that are specific to them. So for parents, you might talk about children and education. For anybody local, you think about local things for local people, that kind of idea. Now your topic could, again, be more or less anything, although it's always going to be something that you would know a little bit about or be at least familiar with, something that's applicable to you. And again, it's generally linked to whatever the articles in section A were about. Now, a good way to think about it is that the topic always presents a problem or a social issue, and your job is to say what the problem is, why it's a problem and why it's relevant that it's a problem, and also how we can solve the problem. Now, it's worth also having a basic structure ready for your writing. Something along the lines of, possibly, an opening for whatever the genre is. So a headline, dear, a name the person, that greet the audience, that kind of idea. Then, something to grab their attention. So it could be a shocking statistic, it could be a rhetorical question, a description of someone to feel sorry for, that kind of idea. Then think, what was it like in the past? Was it better? Was it worse? Why? Then what was it like in the present? What is the problem? Why is it a problem? What's our solution? Then think about points of view. It can be your own point of view, an expert's point of view, someone who might disagree with you. Then think about the future, and it could be the future that you want it to be if we do change, or the future it'll be if we don't change. And then at the end of it, the closing for whatever the genre is. Phrased another way, in terms of a really simple way of putting it, something along the lines of genre opening, introduction and attention grab, past, present and perspectives, future, genre closing. Unlike paper 1, it's not quite as easy to have pre-prepared sections, but you can, for example, practice using your persuasive features. And daft forest is a way that people often do that. So things like the direct address when you talk to your audience, using assertions, so those opinions you state like they're facts, alliteration, anecdotes as little personal stories, facts and figures, opinions, and especially with opinions, thinking about expert opinions or alternative opinions, not just your own. Rhetorical questions are always useful, repetition's really good, emotive examples are brilliant, and exaggeration. Statistics, superlatives, the best, the worst, and so on, similes, triplets. Now I tend to call the list daft forest when I teach, but again, there's loads of ways of putting it. I've come across a forest, a dark forest, even in one school I went into a dark red forest. Though I do think daft forest pretty much covers it. Now whichever one you've been taught or use, it's basically the same things, so you just try and make sure you use them. You can also try to build vocabulary banks around different topics. So think about things that could be relevant, things like education, work, the economy, homework, healthy eating, the environment, and so on. So think about some of those big ideas, and then words, ideas, problems that you might come up to do with them. Now if we just apply that quickly to this question. So for this question, for example, I'd start by looking at the basics for the question. So I'm being asked to write an article, there's my genre, about looking after the environment, there's my subject, and my audience, it says, are readers of a local newspaper, so local people. Right. Now for this topic, I think I'm going to say that the problem is that people don't go out and see nature enough, so they don't care enough about it, and that a possible solution is something along the lines of providing more experience and opportunities for young people and their families to go out and experience nature and see it, and that kind of idea. Right. Now remember, no one's expecting you to be an expert on every topic that could possibly ever come up. You can't possibly be. What's being assessed is your ability to think about whatever topic you're given and talk about it in a particular style for a particular audience in a particular genre. Now my genre opening needs to be for an article, so I'm going to stick the topic in front of the word matters, and that always seems to work, and that gives me nature matters as a headline, and again it always seems to work for an article. Now to grab attention, I'm then going to build an emotive example, I think, around someone who's a victim of this issue. So I'm going to give a child in their room struggling to breathe from the poor air quality and the stress, their entire life lived virtually, screens and phones, computers. They're consumed by the stresses and the strains of school and family, and they're losing perspective. I want to make it quite specific, so she's going to be called Ellie, there we go, and I'm going to make her 12 years old, and I'll describe the way that she's sitting in her dark bedroom, her breath wheezing, her eyes haunted by peer pressure, dulled, blurred by the ever-present artificial light of her phone, depressed and isolated thanks to a lack of emotional and social support from her family downstairs, that kind of idea. Right. I'm then going to go back into the past. Now I could go back a really long way, but I think probably easier just to go for the recent past, so say 20, 30 years. And that's always easier, I think, than trying to go for a long time ago. I'm going to argue that it was better in the past because there were fewer devices and less foreign travel, so people engaged more with the world around them directly, and they cared more about their local environment, and that we need to get back to things being like that. So what I'll end up with just for that is something along the lines of this as an opening. Nature matters. Imagine for a moment a child. She huddles in the corner of her room, her chest wheezing with the effort of breathing the dry, thin, polluted urban air. She huddles, her eyes bruised by sleep deprivation and the stresses and strains of school and family, haunted by the relentlessness of peer pressure, dulled and blurred by the ever-present artificial light of her mobile phone. She sits alone, depressed and isolated, thanks to a lack of emotional and social support from her family downstairs. Now, this isn't a fictional example. The girl's name is Sophie. She's 12 years old, and she lives in our area. And Sophie, like so many children, is a victim of the way in which our view of what is natural has become profoundly unnatural. It wasn't always this way. Go back in time 20 years, 30 years, and things were different. With fewer devices, with less technology, families spent more time together, children spent more time outside, and mental health and physical fitness were better as a result. Because foreign holidays were an occasional luxury rather than simply an annual routine, there was less pollution, and our environment and our people were happier and healthier. Where did it all go so wrong? Now, beyond that, I'm going to want to pin down the problem, and that's a lack of familiarity and access to nature, which is what we said earlier, and why there's a problem, which is the busy pace of life and the lack of knowledge among parents and children. Right. I'm going to offer a solution, which is to build more opportunities for young people in their school life to experience the natural world and to publicise these kinds of places and spaces more to families. Now, for my next bit, I want to talk about viewpoints. So I'm going to link in, I think, a mention of someone who would disagree. So maybe a young person who thinks that living online is normal and healthy. I'm going to add in an expert who would agree with me. No, I'm making it up. So I'm going to have Professor Smith of Cambridge University, and I'm going to make up something impressive sounding that they've said. So she's going to argue, I think, that time outside is better for both physical and mental health, but also provides more time for personal connection, which can help with family bonding. So she'll say something about that. Now, my next bit's going to be the future. Now, I think for this, I'm going to go positive for my future. So I'm going to link myself back to my victim from the start of my piece. And I'm going to go for, I think I changed the name to Sophie. So Sophie, right. So we can picture Sophie now outside, up a local landmark. So for me, where I am, Rosebery Topping, if you're from the Teesside area. So a local hill. She'll be breathing fresh air, seeing the enormity of the natural world around her, the greenery and the growth. She'll be spending time with her family in person, enjoying each other's company, healthy, whole, balanced, that kind of idea. Now, in terms of the closing for this, to make sure the genre is right, an article doesn't really need a formal closing off or a signing off, so I'm just going to leave it with that future bit, which provides enough of an ending, I think, for me. Obviously, if it was a letter, I'll sign off with yours sincerely. If it was a speech, I'll finish by thanking my audience for listening. Now, as with pretty much everything in the language exams, higher marks don't necessarily come from longer answers, although you do need a long enough piece to build your points and show the range of skills. As with language 1, try for this question to use a variety of language for effect. Essentially vary your vocabulary. And it is the same things. So it's not just quick, for example, it's rapid and urgent and abrupt. It's not just light, it's luminous and incandescent. So I'm trying to use a few more interesting words, but also a broader range of words. Do think about your audience rather than your own viewpoint. So this isn't about trying to say what you think. It's about trying to steer your audience around to agreeing with you. It's about focusing on what they think. So as an examiner, my heart sinks when I come across a piece where it just starts with, I think that. Because it's just off-putting and it's dull and it doesn't work for me as an audience. It's not about me, it's about the person writing, and it doesn't fit. Now, do develop and think about the implications of the points that you make. It's a problem. Why? What are the implications of that problem? Who is impacted by the problem? and there's a solution. Well, that's great. So what are the wider impacts that solution can have? Who will it affect? Does it have wider effects beyond just this topic? So, for example, thinking about, the family spending more time outside, young people spending more time outside. Better for health, less pressure on local healthcare, for example, better for mental health, therefore happier students in school, happier family life. It might create local jobs, for example, caring for the local area, that kind of idea. Now, obviously, you'll want to paragraph, but do also paragraph for effect. Get some single line paragraphs in. I think I built that into the answer that I did a bit of a few minutes ago. The same goes for sentences. Mix it up. Use some longer sentences, some shorter ones. If you're confident with sentence structure, embed some, use some subordinate clauses, that kind of idea. Above all, make sure you don't lose sight of what you're writing, why you're writing, and who you're writing for, and that kind of thing. And there we go. That's Language Paper 2, Section B, so question 5. As ever, don't forget there's a whole range of videos covering every other topic on this playlist, and there's more detailed versions also on the rest of the Net English YouTube channel. Thank you very much for your time today. Take care.